Better Preach, Episode 58. Speaking from a relationship with God, not for, with Brad Pierron. Welcome to Better Preach, a podcast for Catholic leaders on delivering and developing great Catholic talks. I'm your host, Ryan O'Hara, a 25-year vet of college and young adult ministry. Thanks for inviting me into your journey of communicating the true, the good, and the beautiful. God's approval, human applause, and abundant affirmation. I'd be lying if I said these three things didn't factor in, at times, to my motivation and experience as a Catholic speaker over the years. While their importance has certainly diminished, I can still see their remnants popping up from time to time. Because here's the deal. You want to do an excellent job that brings God honor, meets the expectations of your boss or whoever has hired you, and you want it to be received well by everybody listening. But is that approval, applause, affirmation, is that solid ground to stand on as the motivation and criteria for success for people called to preach and teach the gospel? No, it's not. And today in my conversation with Brad Pierron, we go right at this question, and his view and perspective on it was as well articulated as I've come across. His outlook on this will comfort and convict. So look out, my friends. We've got a hot one today. Brad Pierron is the missionary program director at Damascus in Centerburg, Ohio, where he has served since its inception 7 years ago. He is a graduate of The Ohio State University and is currently pursuing a master's degree in business administration through Franciscan University of Steubenville. In addition to his service with Damascus, Brad serves as a co-host for Beyond Damascus, a national Catholic radio show and podcast, and he speaks to thousands every year. As a missionary formator, he is passionate about bringing the gospel of Jesus Christ to life in the church today, and as a product of Southern Ohio, his ideal day would include a sporting event, a truck bed, and a large glass of sweet tea. He and his lovely wife, Nina, were married in August of 2020 and are expecting their first child in January and currently reside in Lewis Center, Ohio. If this podcast has been helpful to you, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you, either by sharing a rating and written review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or reaching out via my website, ryanohara.org/betterpreach. There's a contact form right there. Would love to hear from you. And before we start, please be sure to stop by and say hi on Instagram at betterpreach. Let's get into it. Brad Pierron, welcome to the Better Preach podcast. I am so pumped to have you on the show, and we've known each other for a number of years, and it's just so good to reconnect and catch up, man. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
You bet, man. So, Brad, I love your heart. You have a heart for the church. You have a heart for a mission. You have a call to teach and to preach. How did that first start in you? And when did you get a sense like the Lord is calling me into this? How did that all unfold for you?
I think that from a young age, I realized that communicating and relating to people was something that I enjoyed more than the average person. It's actually funny. One of the first stories my parents tell me is they bring their young boy to Cincinnati, and I'm from Portsmouth, Ohio, which is a small town. And in Portsmouth, you kind of know everyone. In Cincinnati, you don't know everyone. And they had me in Cincinnati, but I was still living by Portsmouth rules. And we were out and about, and the next thing they know, they've lost their young boy. These young parents are like, where is our son?
The child
And as
Jesus,
they're looking around for me, that's right. Yeah. Similar to Mary and Joseph, only I wasn't in the temple. I was in a diner at a booth with a family I didn't know, just talking about,
oh my gosh,
whatever we might have been talking about.
How old were you?
I think from a young age, I must have been 3 or 4. So not
That's
very
awesome.
old, but definitely already ready to speak and to relate. And so I would say that started at a young age. But when it comes to this call that I feel has unfolded over the last 9 years or so, I think back to a conference that was in the Twin Cities, and Minneapolis, St. Paul. And there was a night of adoration that changed my life forever, where Jesus very clearly made himself known to me. And I left the chapel that night convinced that he was who he says he is, and convinced that everyone needed to know about that. And I think that from that move to that second point, which was everyone needs to know about this, I wanted to use whatever gifts that the Lord had given me to make that as possible as it could be. And so, yeah, from a young age, probably had the knack and desire for communication and relationship. And then when the Lord captured my heart, it was the only natural response, I thought. I think every authentic encounter we have with Jesus, by its nature, leads us to mission. And speaking was one of the areas of mission I felt called to.
You shared before we started that you'd done some announcing, broadcasting through the Big Ten network.
That's right.
Were you announcing games or what? Or were you reporting?
I was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, not reporting, but I was doing play-by-play and color commentating. And I was a communication major at Ohio State, minors in economics and political science. So I was like a pre-law specialty. And I was thinking about going to law school pretty much all of my undergraduate career. And because of the communications aspect of the degree, there were all these journalism opportunities. And I love sports. I've always loved sports. And I was looking through some opportunities, and they didn't have anyone to broadcast women's soccer.
Okay.
And I should say I didn't know a lot about soccer at the time. I do now know quite a bit more than I did when I first saw that opportunity. And I just said, I'll do it. I'd love to learn. And so I went and learned, and one thing became another. I called all of the women's home games that year for Ohio State. And then the men's Big Ten soccer tournament was at Ohio State that year. And because I had logged the hours there, I was asked to do that. And then from that, I was asked to then do basketball. And from basketball, asked to do baseball. And then from baseball, I did football. And so that was the year that Ohio State won the national championship. Was 2014-15 was the year that I stepped into that. And then that was also the year that the Lord really captured my heart. So it was the year after that that I stepped out of sports broadcasting. I was still doing sports journalism, writing for a publication at Ohio State. And then more of my speaking engagements went towards, evangelization, catechesis, apologetics, all that good stuff.
Make the connection between what you learned through, again, learning a sport, but sports broadcasting is nowhere near as easy as it looks or sounds, right? Like it is, you have to
100%.
fill time. You've got a lot of different details that are floating. You're having to make meaningful connections, and from sport to sport, that all changes. Color and play-by-play with baseball is very different than football. What did you learn in those spaces that's still helping you today?
Yeah, two things come to mind. First is that in order to present what you're being asked to present in any given presentation, you need to know far more than what you're actually going to present. And I find that true even today. There's something about the preparation that requires you to know more than you're going to give, because it allows you to go where the presentation goes. So in broadcasting, right, when you know the entire roster, if there's a substitution that wasn't going to be able to be foreseen before the game, you're able to make that adjustment really easily when it happens in the game, because you knew far more than you needed to for what you thought you'd present. And I think that is really important in preaching and teaching for the church as well.
Yeah.
Because it's
say why.
It's a sign of authenticity.
Okay. It's a sign of authenticity. What does that look like?
I think that when I say it's a sign of authenticity, it's you speaking not as someone who is I think merely memorized what you were asked to, but you're someone that's taken interest in what you're doing. Those aren't mutually exclusive. But I do think when someone comes to something and simply gives what's been memorized, you can feel it. And when they come and they give something that they've had real connection with, that they've really worked with, that they've put their heart into. You can tell. And so that would be the one. And then the second part, I think, is just the value of preparation. That even as you get to know more and more, the value of preparing exactly what you think you are going to present. One of the big things for broadcasting sports is the introduction, right? Because you're drawing people in, you're letting them know that they're at Value City Arena inside the Jerome Schottenstein Center for today's matchup between Ohio State and Maryland. And the more, especially when you're on radio, the more that you can help people visualize that, the better. And that only comes through preparation. And so those are the two things that I would say is that first, the more you know about the thing that you're engaging in, the more authentic you'll present. And second, preparation, whether it be on a paper that's in front of you as you write it down with a pen, or if it's in your mind, or if it's in dialogue with the Lord in prayer, preparation really matters.
So let's just jump into it. Like with the process of preparing a talk, you've been preparing for a long time, in a sense, like to speak into a mic, to have something to say, albeit around sports. You had all that kind of preparation. So as you started giving talks, what did your preparation process look like then as you were transitioning from broadcasting into preparing kind of spiritual messages and teachings to kind of where you are now 10 years or so later?
Yeah, I think the Lord was really good to me in the sense that he allowed me to experience success with each step of my own internal walk with him. And what I mean by that is, like, when I first had my conversion, there was so much passion in what I had to say. There was like a real belief that was beginning to take root that didn't have a ton of knowledge around it, but had some, you know? And so I remember playing to that strength early in my conversion in the talks that I was given, is really letting people know that I just believe what I'm saying and not necessarily having all of the perfect things to say or even the best evidence for what I'm saying, but having some evidence for what I'm saying and letting them know that I believe this. And it's funny to see how that heart that was developed there has been maintained, but has also matured over time. That as I've been with the Lord more and more, as my relationship with him has become, you know, more than daily, right? Like where I'm able to just accompany him in my life and learn from him, the more that I've been able to add deeper content and further enrichment to what I'm saying, but also maintaining that heart that really believes what it's speaking.
Yeah.
And not just using the logic or the passion, but allowing the logic to build off of that passionate heart that I had at the beginning. So that would probably be one of the hallmarks of maturation that I've seen in my own walk with the Lord.
And it's not only in your walk with the Lord, but it's playing itself out in talks.
Certainly.
I like how you describe your passion is believing what you're sharing. Why is that so crucial? Why can't people just say true things, regardless of how it fits into their life? Why can't people just say true things? Why isn't that good enough?
That's a good question. I think it's because everything that is true is also the way and the life. And so when someone speaks something that's true, but it's devoid of a way that's being made in their life, or it's devoid of a life that they're wanting to commit to, there's something about it that doesn't represent the fullness of what that truth is supposed to be.
Wow.
When Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, he doesn't say I'm a way, a truth, and a life, or the truth, and then a way and a life, or the way and a truth and a life. He's all of those.
Yeah.
And so when we're speaking something that's true, we also want to make sure that it's a message that both has been helping us find a way and is helping those we're presenting to find a way. And it's a life that is being presented that we want to live and we want to invite others into living. And so when you just speak something that's true, it's not the fullness of what it could be, because we're body, mind, and soul. we've never just been reason. We've also been faith. We've never just been body. We're also soul. And we're not just a logic stream. We're also a passion driven, relationship oriented being, right?
How do you make yourself vulnerable, or your what is going on in and through your heart accessible to others in appropriate ways, right? In
Mm-hmm.
the talks that you give.
Yeah, I think I try to present everything that I give from stage in the same way I would give it to someone I loved.
Hmm.
It's feeling exactly what's happening, and it's responding to what's happening. And when we speak and when we present and when we preach and when we teach with a heart that's in tune with what the Lord's doing, we simply need to allow our heart to yield to that. And that brings the appropriate level of vulnerability, right? Because if in my mind, I'm constantly wondering, am I going to say too much here or not enough? To be able to predetermine that is almost impossible, because there's going to be part of it that's dependent on where your heart's at as you're presenting. There's part of it that's going to be dependent on where the hearts of the people receiving it are at. And it's not devoid from the preparation we were talking about, right? Because when you know what you're going to speak, you're able to be present to what you're speaking more. You're not trying to find your words. You know what your words are, and then you can allow your heart to come into alignment with those as you're speaking it. And I think that's one of the best parts of a talk, right? Is whenever you surprise yourself. You surprise yourself with a connection that you made that you didn't make in preparation. You surprise yourself with an emotion that came up when you shared that story that you knew you were going to share. Those are the moments where you know you're locked in. So I think that allows you to be vulnerable, and that allows you to present in a way that's not too much, but also not too little. And it allows you to be authentic.
And so what I'm hearing there is it starts with a relationship with the Lord, but it continues through a preparation that's robust, that's solid, that kind of covers the canvas, exceedingly. And then there's the freedom to kind of move as the Spirit hones in. And that is a cool
That's right.
moment. I don't know if in a lot of these interviews, if we've talked about the joy of that surprise. It doesn't happen all the time, but because of the preparation, because of you're bringing yourself, it does happen sometimes, and it is cool. It's a delight having a light bulb go off in my mind, and then to be able to communicate it in real time. It's just an incredible dance, and it's a mysterious thing.
Yeah, I think that's the way to. I think that's a really good analogy for it too, that of a dance, right? Because like there's a rhythm to the dance, and the steps and things like that, but there's a rhythm to it as well. And I think that that's been my favorite part of preaching and teaching versus sports broadcasting versus giving a closing argument in a courtroom. Like what makes preaching and teaching, what makes evangelization, catechesis, and apologetics so fun in my mind is that there's no bottom to it. And so whatever I've prepared is not the fullness of the case, because that which I'm talking about is like so much bigger than me that it's almost laughable to even to like talk about it. And that's so amazing, because like it's only been on a couple occasions, but when I'm asked to exhort while the Lord's exposed in adoration, and I have these amazing experiences in prayer before going up to exhort, in that moment of realizing like you would do this better without me. Like if it was just you speaking for you, it'd be better. But you love me so much, and you want to accompany me so much that you're giving me this opportunity. You don't need me, but you want me so much that it looks like need.
Yeah.
We call that love.
Yeah.
Right? We call that love. And yeah, it's those moments of being surprised. I wonder if we could, as preachers of the gospel, allow ourselves to be prepared enough to not lose our words, but also open enough that he would be able to do that more often than he is now, because he wants relationship with us, and it's our relationship with him that is most attractive to those listening. We can make the best points in the world, but him alive in you is what's going to bring others into conversion.
I love that. As we mentioned at the, before the podcast, you're closer to the beginning, God willing, closer to the beginning than the end of where the Lord is leading you.
Yeah.
There's many more talks you'll be giving in the future than you've already given, God willing, right? I also know that you've surrounded yourself with mentors. You've surrounded yourself with brothers and people who are a little bit further along that you've learned from. How important has that been as you've been doing more and more speaking, the role of mentors and examples? And even if you could share, one or two of those folks, who have they been and what has their impact been?
Yeah, well, I think the short answer is that it's critical. And the reason it's critical is interesting, because it's critical because, yes, they're going to teach you so much about the technicalities of preaching and teaching, but also because their relationship with you is going to bring into your life wisdom that actually awakens new things in your own presentations. And I think that like look at Paul, right? Paul has Barnabas and he has Timothy. That's not by accident. We kind of need that in our lives. And the Lord is writing that story from the early parts of the church, that you need someone that's a mile marker down the road from you and a mile marker behind you, because they both give you these insights that you wouldn't have without them. And I often present on discipleship, and I want to kind of carry over some of the principles that I use for discipleship into what you're saying about mentorship and speaking. And that fundamentally, you have two scriptures that highlight discipleship, right? The first is, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. It's what Jesus says to us, right? That disciple means learner. And if I want to be a lifelong disciple, I have to be a lifelong learner in Jesus to learn from him. And then on the other side, you hear Paul say, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And there's discipleship as well, that he's a mile marker up the road in his pursuit of Jesus, who's asking us to follow him. And it allows me to see the areas where his stride has been perfected, the areas where his walk has been matured. And yeah, at Damascus, I'm so fortunate to have, and I know you've interviewed him on an earlier episode, and I'm sure it's phenomenal. I haven't gotten to listen to the whole thing yet, but Dan Dimite, who has just been such a dear brother of mine. He's on the Beyond Damascus podcast with me, and also Aaron Richards. And it's hard to put into words what they've meant to me in the last 7 years of being at Damascus, because they saw something in me before I saw it in myself. They gave me opportunities that I don't think I would have had unless they put them before me. And it's so interesting to be able to be in that podcast format with them now and dialoguing and saying things that are, paraphrases and continuations of what they've told me over the last 7 years. So I would say that mentorship, yes, teaches you the art of preaching and the art of teaching, because you're able to kind of take what you like from the different mentors in your life and implement that into the presentation. And I'm speaking more towards the ministry world, obviously here. But I think in addition to that, whoever your mentors are in whatever you do, including preaching and teaching, allow them to also be mentors that you're in relationship with, because I think that it's the relationship that reveals things to us just as much as the practical tips, tricks, and teachings.
How are you still growing? What are the kind of benchmarks you're still working on hitting as a communicator yourself?
So I would say that the first answer that comes to mind when I think about how the Lord is continuing to grow me as a communicator, as a presenter, as a speaker, I think about, and I know this is always my proclivity, but I think about what he's doing in my heart in this season. And one of the critical aspects of my walk with the Lord right now is him so lovingly and so gently pointing out to me the ways that I still do things so as to prove something about me to others.
Hmm.
And so there's this particular aspect of my speaking and presenting that's not seen necessarily by the audience, but is seen by the Lord before I get onto stage, where I'm recognizing more and more how I desire when I go up to speak or I go up to preach, I am going up there and living from relationship with the Lord and not for relationship with the Lord. I'm living from an identity that's founded, not for an identity that's founded. And it's a really amazing place to be. And I don't think I would have had words for it even like a year ago, because there is something about, and also I think the Lord's been showing me that life is a lot like a corkscrew. He doesn't necessarily reveal to us a bunch of new things over the course of our lifespan, but rather similar things through a different lens that we're seeing from a different angle as we get deeper and deeper into the life that we're living. And I think that from the very beginning, I knew that there was an aspect of my heart that was still performing, because I was a basketball player. I was a football player. I was a baseball player. I did broadcast journalism. I wanted to write papers that were excellent. I wanted to be the best. And there's nothing innately wrong in those different things. But the one thing that I was aware of in that performing is oftentimes it was for the applause of others. It was for the, it was, I was presenting not so that they would be built up, but that I would be built up in their recognition of my gift. And as I've been working with the Lord in that, it's been beautiful because I don't feel like I'm condemning my old self, because I was just at a higher point in the corkscrew. And now I'm just a little farther down in the corkscrew and I'm seeing the same thing and I'm being asked to remove it in a different way. I'm being asked to step into it in a different way. And I think that that's a real beauty whenever God shows us things like this in our life. We don't want to condemn our past self because we were at a different place. And we don't want to shorthand our current self because we're in a particular place. And we don't want to necessarily project a future self because we're going to be in a different place. And so where I'm at right now in my presentation, I feel as confident as I've ever felt in my ability to articulate the message that God puts on my heart. I feel more confident than I've ever felt in my ability to put together a talk that's captivating, that's content driven, and that hits both the mind and the heart. And even amidst that, I see so much work that I'm excited to collaborate with the Lord in my own heart, where it's like, okay, Lord, when I go up here, I want to represent you for the sake of them, not represent me for the sake of me. And that's subtle. It's very subtle, but it's good.
No, it's an important distinction. Could you share what you noticed you desired? And like what can even walk us into thoughts that might have come to mind that would have indicated that for rather than from?
That's good. I think that since the moment of my conversion, I knew mission was the right response, but I didn't always know why mission was the right response. I think for a while, I had a presupposition because of former beliefs that I had that mission and the achievement of good outcomes in mission was to prove to the Lord that he did well to save me. Like, see all the things I can do, Lord? Like, you chose the right one. Way to pick me on the dodgeball wall, like way to get me on your team because I can do all these things.
Yeah.
And I think that, so I would go up and it would almost be like the entirety of my analysis on how I did in a talk was entirely on let me try to put words to that. The entirety of my analysis would base itself off of how I felt the audience understood and related to me instead of how well I delivered what God asked me to deliver. And those are two different schemas.
For sure. And would you judge that in part just internally, or was it also based on needing a certain kind of feedback that would validate those internal feelings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It was both. So I would walk off and I would check my own heart on like, how did I feel? Did I stutter over my words? Did I hit all of those stories perfectly? Were people seemingly engaged the whole time? Was I as funny as I wanted to be? And then if I would answer all those, yeah, I think I was, then I would look for affirmation to affirm that thought was true. Right. And now it's really awesome because the last probably year, the first thing I do when I step off is I think to myself, what did the Lord ask me to do tonight? Did I give that the attention it was due before the talk? And did I give my heart in the talk? And then from there, it's like a mission support raising ask. The way by which I live as a missionary is through financial resource of others. And when I make an ask, my job is to ask with reverence, with joy, with humility. It's actually theirs to respond to. Like how they respond is not my duty. My duty is all the things before that. I have actually one little story about a talk that really shifted my life in this arena. And I came off from a talk that I gave at one of our missionary trainings. And at Damascus, we have hundreds of summer missionaries. And I have I shouldn't even say good, the great fortune of being able to oversee the program that we have here. And I was giving a talk at our training and I walked off thinking that I was as true to the message as I could have been. But I was also recognizing that a couple things that I didn't say that I wanted to say. And as I went to the back though, I was in this kind of wrestle in my heart. And one of the women that I'm in community with here at Damascus came up to me and she invited me to ask the Lord what he thought about that talk with like unprompted. Like I was trying to kind of escape through the back so that no one would come up and say, great talk, Brad. So no one would come up and give me a high five or ask me, I wanted to just I was in this kind of inner wrestle. And she just had a prompting from the Lord to invite me into that. And so I did. And I took the moment to just close my eyes and ask the Lord what he saw. And the image that he gave me was so profound. And just to make it just to use the parts that are critical, the image that he showed me, he and I were out in the yard building a barn, and I was a little toddler and he was a past middle-aged father-looking figure, and the Lord, the father was just building this barn and I was just taking wood off the ground, handing it to him, and he was building a barn. And this happens for a few moments. You know how those things can go. They feel like they take forever, but it's just a matter of seconds. And I then went inside because it was hot outside to get like a water or something like that. And in my imagination, as I go into this house, Mary is at the kitchen sink and she's doing dishes, and she turns the water off and looks over, and Mary just so gently asks how everything's going outside. And I look at her and I said, it's going awesome. Dad and I are building a barn. And the revelation that was coming to me in that moment is that I wasn't doing anything, Ryan. I was picking up wood and handing it to him. If anything, I was probably slowing the barn building process down. But I went inside, and when I was asked how it was going, I said awesome. And why did I say it was awesome? Because Dad and I were doing something together.
I love it.
Because we were building a barn. And like that's what we're supposed to be doing in our talks. Like that's what we're supposed to be doing, is we're building a barn with the Lord. And we want, and the barn's going to take so many different shapes, right? Like the barn's going to be a place where people find refuge. It's going to be a place that people can paint murals on the side of, and it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be a place where people can store old things and store new things and store not yet possessed things. It's going to be so many different things, but the Lord in that moment was just reminding me that the goal of me going up and presenting and speaking is not perfection in the way that I think about it, but perfection in the way that he thinks about it, which is how much of my heart am I allowing him to use? How many words in this talk am I allowing to be his? Like just a lived relationship presented in front of others with thoughts and stories that are uniquely mine. That seems to be probably the best way to bring about fruit, even if I can be really clever in other ways.
That's a great image. What a powerful image. And it's true. You and your dad were building that barn, and you were playing your role, and he was playing his. And to me, that's where we kind of lock in to how often do I kind of overstep and actually go beyond, go before, and kind of sidestep what Jesus is doing. And man, here I am. I'm probably 15 years ahead of you, but I'm still right there. I'm still, even today, experiencing that struggle, that doubt, that need for affirmation, and yet the Lord will continue to invite me to play that role and to further understand that beautiful image that you're describing. And I love that you're grabbing onto that now. I wish that I would have had a better understanding of all of that. And that's why you need mentors. That's why you need people to give you feedback. That's why you've got to be able to ask for that input, and that we're not operating solo. Right. I know that you've been doing some teaching on preaching. Give me just one thing that if you could say, kind of share with those who are listening, what's one thing they could do for their next talk that would make the biggest difference? It could be practical, it could be impractical, but something that they could do, or some way they could think about it that would really help them the next time that they're before a mic.
That's good.
What would you say?
So I would say, know your proclivity and make one conscious decision to go against it. Here's what I mean by that. So whenever I'm preparing a talk, I know my proclivities in preparation. I know if my proclivity is to over prepare and write out every single word that I'm going to speak so that I have comfort that I'm not going to forget something. And I know if my proclivity is to not do as much work as I probably should and just fill in the gaps because I'm a good orator. Whatever that proclivity is, making one conscious decision, if you are the person who usually writes out the entire talk, what if you, instead of taking your outline all the way down to the far right justified place, what if you made your 7 points, your 5 points, and what if you brought them down only 2 subsections down and allowed yourself to flow in those points differently than you have before the next time you present? If your proclivity is to not do as much of that work and to really just say, I'm going to talk about this and I'm going to get passionate and I'm going to be an amazing orator when I go up there and everyone's going to love it, then maybe what would it look like for you to discipline yourself to actually write some things down so that you can build on those later? Because an outline, as much as it is for preparation, it's also for accountability and it's for building off of later. And so whatever your proclivity is, if you take one conscious decision to go outside of it, you're going to be a better long-term presenter, speaker. You're going to be a better representative of the Lord. I mean, look at the church in general, right? We have so many in the church that take their identity in, well, I'm a liberal Catholic, or I'm a conservative Catholic, or I'm a traditional Catholic, or whatever it might be. Catholic means universal, like we're baptized. And so we all tend to create encampments around that which we're comfortable with. And this happens at the micro level and at the macro level, but at least at the micro level, if we would know our proclivity, first of all, that means we're being honest with ourselves, which means we're not afraid of what our identity is before the Lord. And second, it would be us saying, and you know what, Lord, I want to trust you a little differently this time, or I want to work with you a little differently this time. So whatever that might be, and it doesn't have to be in the preparation stage. I just thought that might be the best visual for people out there who are looking at how could I do that? That's at least one way you could do it. But know your proclivity and make one conscious decision to do it differently before you give your next talk, before you preach the next time you're given the opportunity.
I love that. I'm hearing you say, go against what's comfortable. Go against where you tend to navigate, especially if it's not helping. And you get a sense, this is something we all know. I hope that we're all at least self-aware enough that we can go, here's one of my major stumbling blocks. Let's deal with the big rock first. And that's a great point. Because what if you did that every time you gave a talk? You just focused on one thing that you're going to work on, or you keep working on the same one thing until it shifts.
Right. Well, we'd be more and more whole, wouldn't we? We'd be more and more whole. We'd be more and more the expression of the Lord we're supposed to be. And I think that, at the end of the day, that's going to be more authentic than anything else. If we go up there and we're amazing orators that are a little sloppy because we've always gotten away with passion, we're never going to be able to see what God has for us in the other direction. And we're never going to be able to be as reliant on him as we want to be. And we're never going to be able to be surprised by him. And on the other side, the exact same way, if we're self-reliant, we're not going to leave enough space for him. And we're never going to know what it could have been if we left more space for him. Because again, he wants relationship with us. He wants relationship with us if we're a writer. He wants relationship with us if we're a creative designer. And he definitely wants relationship with us if we're a speaker or a presenter or a communicator on his behalf. Because the Lord revealed himself in Genesis when he spoke, right, over that chaotic waters. And it's interesting because the chaotic waters didn't become completely unchaotic. It's that order met chaos. Yeah. And we sometimes have comfort towards order and we sometimes have comfort towards chaos. But at the very beginning, what happens is the two of those come together with the spoken word, right? And so that's what we want to do, is allow ourselves to be at this place where we're not in full control, but we're not out of control. The Lord's in the driver's seat and we're accompanying him. And I think we'll all be better for it.
Amen. What a great word. Brad, where could people connect with you? You've got the Beyond Damascus podcast. That's one place. I hope people will check that out. I'll list that in the show notes. If people wanted to connect with you or Damascus,
that'd be great.
Where would you point them?
Yeah, so Damascus.net is where you can find all things Damascus. Like you were saying, Beyond Damascus is the podcast where we are trying to share what's happening within the movement of Damascus and how that can help others outside beyond Damascus, right? And so that's a place to check us out. If there's anyone here that's on social media, which I'm sure most people are, you can find me at j.bradleypierron on all of the social media fronts. First name's John, middle name's Bradley. I go by my middle name, which I think my parents did just to give me a hard time in the adult world. I'm just kidding, but j.bradleypierron. And yeah, season 2 of Beyond Damascus is coming out soon. I have a lot of things coming down the pike in the social media space in the next number of months. So would love to connect with people there.
Yeah, I hope people can check all of those things out. Brad, it's so good to connect with you again and just hear your heart and what God's doing in and through you as you're climbing this mountain and you're moving towards more and more of what God wants. And you've always grabbed it with such great faith, hope, and love for the people in your life. So thanks again for joining me on the show. It's great to have you.
Yeah, glad to be here. I'm really blessed by you, Ryan. Thank you.
Thanks, my friend. If this podcast has been helpful to you, please share a written review and a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or reach out to me. I'd love to hear what you think of the show at ryanohara.org/betterpreach. There's a little contact form. You can connect there. I'd love to hear from you. And y'all have millions of options when you podcast. Thanks for pressing play today. I'm so grateful. See you next time.